So coming up on the big interview this week, I'll be talking to a man who's been a big part of the Northern Irish music scene for the past 30 years. He's a trumpet player, he's a broadcaster, and he's an educator as well. Linley Hamilton, how are you, sir?
I'm great, Robin. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming in today. Now, we must talk, first of all, about the new album that you have out now, Making Other Arrangements. I listened to the whole thing in its entirety the other day, and it really is one of the most chilled out, relaxing albums that I think I've ever heard.
Well, isn't it funny that you listen to it in its entirety? Because, of course, these days nobody does.
Yeah.
Because they're also used to just listening to a track and downloading it and checking it on Spotify. Yeah, I mean, I'm really glad I did the CD, and there's a 10-track CD. Whenever people do an album, they do actually go to the bother of getting the order right and making sure they're saying the right thing at the right time in the album, whether it's about melody or whether it's about improvisations or solo. So the track order was really important to me. From start to finish, there's a reason for the order of every track. So the fact that you listen to it from start to finish is really important, and the fact that you think it's chilled out, I'm thinking it's the strings that give you that false sense of security, because obviously there's still some pretty progressive improvisation on it, you know. But
so this album, it's taken a while to get it together, but it's been a kind of dream of yours for many years to do this, hasn't it?
It has. Well, most jazz albums are funded. So they end up having an Arts Council grant capacity of $3,500 against them, whatever, and they're recorded in 1 or 2 days, and all the musicians do it for free. And I've been in that sort of scenario as well over the years, where I've been working with small quintets that are easy to put on and do the circuit of Limerick, Cork, Dublin, Belfast, Derry, whatever. But this is something that I've always wanted to do. There was a record, probably I was about 25 whenever I bought it, Freddie Hubbard, Ride Like the Wind, and it wasn't an orchestra, as this isn't. It was like a large kind of ensemble with flutes and saxes, whatever, but it was certainly arranged, and it was a mixture of rock, pop and jazz classics done with a jazz fervour as well as a flavour. And I thought, someday I would love to do that, you know, whenever I'm better. And it's possible that I could have done it about 10 years ago. I had a period of time whenever I had a bit of space, because all the bands I was playing with were established, and it was before I'd gone back into education, which I did. And I thought, you know, this is maybe a good time to do this. But if I had done it then, I wouldn't have been able to afford to do it right.
Yeah.
And the expense involved in this kind of project is massive, because you got to pay the musicians, get the studio, there's the pre-production element of doing the arrangements. And nowadays, whenever we do arrangements, some people may still think that you've got a pen and paper and a score. Some people still do that way, and they're looking at all the string parts and sax parts and trumpet parts and drums and bass. They turn the page over. Of course, what we really use now are computer software programs. They allow you to still input all the parts, but then you get a chance to hear the product before it's recorded. So you can still make changes and alterations. So that, although it makes it easier functionally to do, it takes a lot longer to do. And then you have this precarious situation of having a listen to the pre-programmed writing compositions before it's been played, and thinking, I need to make change to this even before it's been played. So that slowed the process down. And then, boy, went into the studio in August, 4 days, and the personnel were picked.
I was going to say, it wasn't just anybody you picked. These are the top players in the country, aren't they?
They are. I mean, I've been playing with these guys, you know, for a long time anyway. These are the guys who would do the big sessions for Paul Brady or Gavin Friday or whatever the big gigs would be. So you'd see them all the time. Or whenever there's a jazz orchestra put together, there's an All-Ireland Jazz Orchestra, there's a New Ireland Jazz Orchestra, which includes UK players, which is really, really cream of the cream, you know. So you're if you're in those bands, you get to work with these guys all the time. So it seemed obvious I'd be using Guy Rickaby, who's the drummer, who was MD for Riverdance, so he's a phenomenal reader, did my first jazz album in 2001, phenomenal jazz improviser, so he was on drums, that was it. Dave Redmond's the leading bass player in Ireland, so he was on bass. And then the guitar, we had a big range, but a lot of the jazz guitarists are jazz guitarists. They want to, within a couple of bars, they're already substituting some new harmony to superimpose their playing on the piece, and that's not what this was about. So I kind of needed to have rock and pop touring guitarist with a sensibility to jazz.
Right,
So we got Nigel Clark, who's from Scotland, who's now moved to Dublin, and he's done a lot of stuff with Hue and Cry and things. So he was perfect. And then the keyboard player is my partner in the organisation, Cian Boylan. So he's done all the string arrangements, and he played piano and organ, and he like me had the overview of what it was doing. So you had me overviewing, I guess, the horns and things like that, him overviewing the rhythm section. It kind of worked really well. And then we had the string section. A lot of the guys are freelance, but a lot of them do work with the RT Concert Orchestra, run by a guy called Ken Rice. And some of the strengths of a project that's so big like this is that you have to empower people and trust people to do their thing. Whenever Cian was doing the arrangements, once I'd imparted the vision to him of what I wanted to do. Like I didn't even want to really hear them until we went back into the studio. I just trusted him to do that. And similarly with Ken Rice, we just left him to do the strings. So we did the string arrangements, but he picked the band, he picked the strings, and we didn't say, well, are you sure they're the right ones? Yeah. We just trusted him to do that. Wow. And that just takes a lot of pressure off you.
Of course, yeah.
You just focus on your own thing.
You must be happy already with the reviews.
Yeah, the reviews have been good. I mean, it's funny, people don't think of jazz as the national pastime of Irish musicians and fans, whatever, but we do have a really big following here. I mean, the Birch Jazz Bar, which is 7 nights a week in Belfast, that's helped with a lot of tourists who come in to hear jazz, with some incredible musicians in the north, people like Scott Flanagan, Milena Gillard, Darren Beckett. He's one of the world's leading jazz drummers. He's doing a master's in Ulster University. David Little, who's had a MOBO nomination. So these guys are like around about, and then similarly in the south, they've had a big school down there called New Park, which is now part of DCU, and they've been producing international and national musicians for the last 20 years. So this has made the product a lot bigger than people would normally surmise. So whenever you get a product like this, which is jazz based, but which has sensibilities to allow it to spread into, I guess, a more easy listening range, then the people come out, they come out and support it. So the reviews have been great, north and south of the border, and now the UK ones are starting to come through with
And I see you've been picking up airplay on RTE and stuff like that as well, which must be amazing.
It's a jazz album, so you do expect to pick up something maybe on Lyric FM Blue of the Night or something, but RTE Radio 1 had it as, I think they had a recommended album of the week, so they picked 3 tracks off it, and RTE Lyric FM had it as album of the week, which is played in the morning show every morning, which is pretty incredible. And Radio Ulster, as I would expect, were very, very supportive, course, so Brian Darcy found a track that was suitable for his show. Even Hugo Duncan, he found a track that he thought was suitable for his show, which I guess is a real compliment to the record, Right. Ralph McLean was, as usual, he likes to get in there first, and so he did. He did the big interview at the start for the radio and picked 3 or 4 tracks off the album, and Walter Love did as well. So I'm very pleased. This week it's album of the week on The Late Show, Eve Blair.
Brilliant, yeah.
So it says, I think, a lot about the record, that it sort of speaks outside of the jazz fraternity, even though some of the soloing's fairly full on,
Yeah. So what age were you when you first discovered jazz?
Yeah. Well, I started playing the trumpet at school when I was 9, and I think in that first year we played When the Saints Go Marching In the school orchestra, and there was an element of improvisation, very little. But whenever I was 14, there was a chemist in Glengormley who's long dead, called Bob Dixon. And for anybody who's old enough to remember Alistair Sim, he was like his twin brother. He just looked like Alistair Sim. And he ran an amateur semi-pro big band, which did all these Jimmy Lally arrangements of the 20s and 30s, worked out. So you had to be able to read, but you had to be able to solo. And it was a large ensemble, there was maybe 14 in it. And for some fluke, I think my mum went to the chemist shop and she'd said I played trumpet, and he says I need a 3rd trumpet, and I ended up doing the gig, and of course I was rubbish, but what worked in my favour were there were 2 older guys in the band in their 50s or 60s, and they were too nervous to take a solo. They refused to take a solo, in fact, so I ended up taking the solos and just making it up, I guess. And then whenever the band reduced in size, I was very valuable because I was getting better at taking the solos. So I ended up playing with that band till I was about 20, 21, and they ended up doing maybe 30 or 40 gigs a year, and I was exposed to that. But to answer your question fully, that means that the listening I was doing was very select, and I was listening to stuff related to that band, mostly Dixieland and traditional music, some New Orleans, and some early big band stuff. So whenever I thought, if somebody had said to me, whenever you're 20, you're a jazz musician, I would have said, oh yes, of course I am, you know. But I hadn't investigated anything from, you know, Charlie Parker, Miles Davis on at that stage.
Yes, yes.
So there was an Irish Youth Jazz Orchestra that I got into, and it was amazing. It was sponsored by the Bank of Ireland at the time, run by a guy called Tom Barry. I don't know if he's still alive. And the conductor was a fella called Bobby Lamb, and Bobby Lamb was from Cork. He was a trombone player, and whenever he was 18, I can't remember the full story, but he got into the Woody Herman herd, so he played in the Woody Herman band. I think he played with Kenton as well. He was one of the unbelievable world-leading big band articulators, so he could read, he knew exactly, and he'd conduct like this, and he'd sing us the parts, you know, and you'd know where the shake was, you'd know the length of the dart, you'd feel, and he would be singing it, and you'd be playing it, and you'd start to feel this swing pulse that just became really natural. But everybody in that band were basically the best players in Ireland at the time, you know, now.
Yes,
so people like Richie Buckley, Michael Buckley, Brendan Doyle, who was on this album, he was in that band. I met him whenever he was 15 and I was 19 or something in that band. So that was really remarkable. We were doing gigs, we were learning how to improvise. There was improvisation classes, he was taking it. And that was it, because every time you went to a gig and you were in a bus, you know, the guys were putting on this music. And I was saying, what's that?
Yeah.
And they were saying, that's jazz. You're not listening to that? I said, I've never heard of it. You know, Rob McConnell, Boss Brass, and all these things. Freddie Hubbard. What? Is that the trumpet? I couldn't get over it. So that was what opened the doors, you know, because then I started listening to that stuff. And then I just needed a bit of luck and a bit of help from some senior players here who were very, very giving to me, that allowed me to get that experience and to step up into that stuff, which is the real McCoy. The jazz of today, I guess, has evolved from that, you know. It
seems to me that the trumpet is a very difficult instrument to learn and to play, is it?
Well, yes, it is. I mean, I think the best way I can explain it is that if I was to walk over, and let's say there was a piano here, and I put my finger on the left-hand side, and I walk up and I put my finger on the right-hand side, I have the same range as the best piano players in history,
right,
in the first 3 seconds. And although I don't have exactly the tone because of the weight of their fingers, if I press them loud enough, I'll sound like them playing one-note piano, more or less.
Yeah.
To do that on trumpet, it'll never happen. I mean, I'll never have the range of Arturo Sandoval or the tone of the different players. You know, we all have our own individual tones. So that is a life in itself, you know, playing in tune, learning to get range and stamina and the breathing and the buzz and the air capacity across 3 or 4 octaves. That's the bit that's hard. I mean, you're playing the same notes as everybody else. I like to think, whenever I teach my students, I like to, because we would teach a class of maybe 25, 30 students, and there's maybe classical, there's maybe trad, there's maybe rock, pop and jazz, there's guitarists, there's trumpet players, there's singers, whatever. And I would say to them, you know, this is very relevant. Whatever we're saying to this singer is very relevant if you're a trombone player or a viola player, because we're all using the same notes.
Yeah.
The only thing that the piano or the trumpet or the trombone does is it gives you the capacity to play them. But we're still having to play the harmony of the piece. We're still having to play the intention of the melody. We're still having to play the dynamics that you're trying to express. But trumpet's a hard one, all right.
Yeah.
It is, but once you have it,
yeah, it's
there, you know. But it takes your 10,000 hours, I guess.
Is there still exercises you have to do even today? Yeah.
Well, there is. I mean, if I was to take it out of the case and play now, I'd have this kind of thing where you're trying to draw the blood into your lips so that the muscles are pumped. It's a bit like your weightlifting, because you're using this tiny area of force, I guess, to create pressure and to create tension. To let the air through, and you have to control this aperture. So the first thing you do is to buzz for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and then you've these stretching exercises to do to loosen up the lips, and then maybe long notes to set that up, and then the thing called lip slurs where you don't use your tongue, kind of thing like that, into the mouthpiece to relax all the muscles before you start to play. So yeah, it's really important to do a warm-up exactly the same way as you'd expect a sprinter or a rugby player to do a warm-up. When you're a footballer, you see them going up and down the pitch half an hour beforehand to get the body ready, and then they rest, and then they go into the zone, and then they're ready to run and sprint without tearing a muscle. And the trumpet's exactly the same. So yes, and some of the lessons that I did from really great teachers whenever I was in my early 20s, because most of my really great experiences of being taught were in my early 20s. I still use those exercises today, and I still teach those exercises because they've served me so well, you know.
Yeah. So when you meet a guitarist, they always talk about the style of guitar and the make of guitar they have. Do trumpeters do the same? Have you got a special make of trumpet that you stick to and use?
Well, you know, I've got my final ones now. I use Taylor trumpets, which
Should we have a look at it? You've got it there.
Yeah, this is a Selmer. This isn't one of my Taylors, and this is a touring bag. It's a torpedo touring bag, and basically, it's a very interesting bag because it's kind of leather, but it's enclosed on the inside.
Right.
And it just fits the trumpet. The trumpet fits in there like a glove. And this is the trumpet, which is a Selmer. And as you can see, there's a part of it missing. And there's a great story about that. But I haven't warmed up, so you do forgive me if I do make a toot and it's not quite as good as it would normally be.
How many trumpets do you own?
I have 3. Right. I've cut everything else out now. I have the Taylor trumpet and a Taylor flugelhorn, which are my main horns, and this, which I use for smaller jazz gigs, but I use for quite a bit of the record. And this is a Selmer, and it's made out of a saxophone metal, so it's got a softer kind of sound. But this is the interesting one, because 5 years ago I broke my right shoulder. And I was supposed to be doing a broadcast for Radio Ulster. It was a tribute to Audley Patterson, who had just died. She was a singer from here, who way back had a lot of success with Chris Barber, who was one of the great European bands. And she sang, in fact, she married him. And there was a tribute to her, so they put this 8-piece band of older guys, mostly, because they were Dixielanders. And they asked me as a broadcaster to co-host a show with Walter Love and to play. So to cut the long story short, I'd had them rehearsing in the house for quite a while. We were just about to go and do the gig. And I had the accident the week before, then I broke a shoulder. I was in hospital. It was quite a bad break for a couple of days. And I kind of reckoned I was going to be pulling out of it. So I rang Walter Love and said, Walter, man, bad news, I've broken my shoulder, so I'm going to try and get somebody in from London to cover this, but you'll have to present the show yourself. And he says, well, I'm actually in the Ulster hospital. I've had a heart attack. So he says, I'm out. Right. So after a bit of thinking and confabbing, I decided that I would do it. So, but I couldn't play. So an engineer friend who's also a trumpet player took one of these small valve casings and machined it into this, and this has a taper. And then for anybody who knows what a boom stand is, it's a mic stand, something a film crew would use. It's an arm that sort of moves around, and they took the microphone attachment off, and they made this little plastic clip that tapered in and fitted inside this. So I was able to basically get a taxi, set up the boom stand, or get somebody to set it up, and then plump this on top of it, and then move the arm of it to the right angle to play. Right. And then play left-handed. Wow. And I actually got a banana, and I marked in hospital, and I marked the distance of the valves to the banana, and I practiced in the banana left-handed. Oh, wow. And I came out and did the gig left-handed and compared the show. And it was funny because weeks afterwards, I just kept this going, and it just kind of felt really, really natural, and there's a nice weight off it. Now, if you're a trumpet player, you have to move this third valve slide. So it's kind of lazy holding it like this, but depending on what key you're in, you don't have to use the third valve slide an awful lot. And I find myself slipping down there and then just remembering to come up if I need to move the slide. But it's a very nice weighted instrument, and it gives it quite a soft tone. And that works really well for jazz, I guess. But I'll not keep it out as such, because I don't want people to think that's what the record sounds like, whatever, you know.
So over the years, you've become the guy that people go to when they want a trumpet player on their album. Van Morrison, Paul Brady, Jackie Dankworth, Foy Vance, everybody's had you on board.
Well, Van, to be fair, hasn't used me on any of his albums. I've played with him, I'm very grateful, but I ended up being on a record with him on a Paul Brady album, because whenever Paul Brady did the songbook, we ended up on that. Yeah, it's been a really interesting career. I would have to say that the main reason for that success has been the fact that Northern Ireland is so small.
Right.
A lot of Northern Ireland musicians move away to London or farther afield because they want to take the chance in the bigger setting. By the time I could really play it all, I was actually quite old. I was in my mid-20s, because I didn't do music at school. So I did civil engineering. I was a civil engineer. But you know how it is, and if you're at school, you find something that you're good at, and if you're quite competitive at it, you stay. And then I was in a band, brass band, Ballyduff Silver Band. Right. And Ballyduff Silver Band sounds very colloquial, doesn't it? For those of you who are listening who are in Ballyduff, which is up near Carnmoney, and you kind of wonder, Ballyduff Silver Band, well, then he did very well coming out of that. I have to tell you a horrible confession. I'm nowhere near the best player that came out of that band. Darren Beckett was the drummer in that band. Plays with Madeline Peru, who plays with the Killers. And I haven't kept abreast of it, but there's some brass band players from that who've made it really, really big in the big brass bands in London, which is more or less as good as it gets in the world. But it was a great learning ground, you know. So I had all this exposure to playing, and I was developing the year with the Youth Jazz Orchestra, and I'd played trad in New Orleans, which a lot of guys hadn't. So you end up then being in a situation where you can go into a studio and somebody says to you, play this written part, and you can have a stab at that, but I need you to take a solo. I can have a stab at that. Could you do this kind of fanfare thing at the end and maybe go up a wee bit higher so I could have a stab at that? Could you maybe work out some brass lines for us? Now, obviously, the big boys don't do that.
Yes, yeah.
But, you're being in situations with maybe rock bands or pop bands, whatever it happens to be, and they would trust you, if your reputation's good enough, to come up with parts that'd be appropriate for them. Well, that's a whole different skill. So if you've done enough of that, then you get your R plates for that as well. Yeah. And that's basically what happened. I was in a situation where people would ring me and say, well, Linley, we need trumpet on this. So I haven't got time to do parts and we don't even know how to do them. Can you take care of it? Yes. Could you bring a sax player? Whatever you need me to do. Could you take a solo? Yes. Could you do this big, real growly thing with an effects pedal? Yeah. Whatever you want me to do.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And then you end up it's very cost effective for them, rather than having to get big parts done and bring sections in. And then you end up, you look at your watch and you think, oh, I'm now on 85 records, whereas the last time I checked, I was only on 7 or 8. So I think I'm actually on 131, because I did a PhD,
right? And
that was one of the requirements at the end of it, was to summarise your career, because of a performance PhD. And I think I'm on 131 records, all kinds of different things, country stuff, rock, pop, jazz.
Well, I was going to say, when you go home at night, do you sometimes listen to other stuff other than jazz? Do you put on a bit of rock? Do you secretly switch over to Hugo when you're in the car?
Well, my wife's fanatical. My wife is Hugo fanatical, and I used to be in Hugo's band in Strabane. I used to be in Hugo's band in Strabane whenever I lived in Strabane, way back. But to cut the long story short, Robin, I've just fallen victim of one of these Facebook things where a friend of mine has unfortunately tagged me for the next 10 days to pick my favourite single.
Right, okay.
And of course, everybody was thinking it's going to be some flippin' heavy jazz thing. And it was Joe Jackson, Is She Really Going Out With Him?
Oh, great song,
and the next 8 or 9 are things like that. Transvision Vamp, Leslie Dowdle from Two and those are things I was really into.
Excellent.
I was really into. There was even a band called After the Fire, and my brother, when he went to Coleraine Uni, and he just loved live music. He went out to see this band called After the Fire, and they had an album, and that I must have listened to that for a year, like every day. So your listening, you see, is really different. And people say if you're a player, it's your listening that makes you, because you've infiltrated your head with cliches and phrases and styles from other players that you're listening to. So if you want to be a real heavy jazz dude, you got to listen to a real heavy jazz palette. And the truth is, I just love music.
Yeah.
So Van has 60 albums. I'd take any one of them, and that would do me for the night. Sure, he's fantastic. Course, you know what I mean? Foy, you talk about Foy fans. Foy's early albums. Everything he's done. But the Guiding Light, the last one. It's ridiculous. The Wild Swan. You could put that album on, and the danger is you may never ever take it off.
I saw you recently with Darren Beckett in No Alibis bookshop. And I mean, that again, you're right up close to
Oh
your
yeah, No
audience in
Alibis.
there.
Well, No Alibis is the ultimate venue in Belfast. No Alibis. McHugh's and No Alibis are the best two venues for jazz. There's no doubt about it. No Alibis run by David, Torrance, and it's a bookshop, and he clears the bookshop away and sets the stage up. But as you say, you're surrounded, but more or less, by punters.
Yeah.
And then McHugh's, of course, we'll always owe a debt to McHugh's. McHugh's, for those of you who know jazz in Belfast, about 5-6 years ago, Dana Masters came to live in Northern Ireland, and we set up a sextet with her and the sax player Melanie Gillard, Scott Flanagan, who was a young whippersnapper at the time. He was better than that, but in comparison to what he is now, now he's one of Europe's leading jazz piano players. He really is. I mean, he's probably the player in Ireland at the minute on piano. And then Steve Davis on drums from Bourne Davis Kane. I mean, it's a hell of a band, So we were in McHugh's every Saturday, and the punters were coming out because it was free in, and they were loving the energy, and they were seeing Dana, and they were hearing the band, and it was just like being in a jazz club in New York every week. So that was a perfect venue. Again, you're only a few feet away from the people in front of you, and that draws a whole different technique of having energy, high impact energy, at a relatively low volume and holding back, and working as a homogeneous unit with everybody thinking the same way. Great for your playing. I mean, that's what we call musicianship. It's not about being a trumpet player there. It's about being a musician. It's about absorbing the audience. It's about making everybody feel. And I know there's people who are listening to this programme today who are religious and devout, and they'll maybe go to Mass maybe even every day, and they'll have a communion every day, or they'll be Presbyterian or Baptist or whatever, and they'll have a communion on a Sunday, and they'll have a spiritual experience whenever they have it. And I'm definitely not trying to be disrespectful, but certainly some of the things that we would do musically in those ensembles would give you that kind of communion with, it's not a religion in any way, but it's a communion with a partnership with the audience, where everybody's in the room at the time, and the only time this particular solo is ever going to happen is today, because all the solos are improvised and people are feeding off, and you're only getting the energy off the guy beside them because of the particular mood that they're in, or maybe the particular audience is very quiet and they're really listening, and it just creates a different dynamic. So you're getting this once in a lifetime experience every time you play in that kind of intense setting that everybody talks about for a while and gets that feeling, and it's like a drug, You just got to get back out again and do it. And sometimes, you don't have one of those gigs in the book for another 3 or 4 weeks. You have other stuff. You have money gigs, and you think, okay, I can do this money gig when I'm asleep.
Yes, yeah.
But this gig, which gives me £3 or €1.50, because sometimes that's how badly paid those modern jazz gigs are. You're driving to the International Bar in Dublin, you're paying all the toll bridges on the way down, you're paying petrol, you're parking, you're coming back, and you've split, €12 with the band or whatever, because there's a glass that's gone round. But that's the one you're terrified of. You have that in your book 3 weeks in advance, and you're starting to wake up in the morning and thinking, God, I just need to get my diminished scales down again. I don't think I've worked on them. I think that piece requires that kind of stuff. And that's the one you're really working for. And then you get that feed off the energy. Wow.
When do you get time to do your stuff for the Ulster University?
This is my stuff for the Ulster University. I'm a lecturer in music, so my contract is 0.5 teaching, 0.5 research. Right. I'm a performance teacher, so everything that I do is based on my what's called ref and submission. So this album, Making Other Arrangements, this is being submitted to the Ulster University as part of their research ref. So as well as that CD, I have an EPK, which is an electronic press kit, which I know you've seen with videos and all that kind of thing. There's videos done. I've transcribed every single solo on that record. I've analysed every single solo on that record. I've put a 30-page document in with that, and that's in a wee box. It's just about to get taped once the reviews are printed off, sealed, and handed over to the university. So they're wanting me to do this. It's not like they're not, So, and this is, of course, I think they see that the passion and the energy that I have for playing is valuable for the students, and kind of works,
Great stuff. You've got Darren Beckett as well helping you out with university stuff too, haven't you?
Well, he's studying a master's. Scott Flanagan's studying a PhD. A phenomenal vocalist called Jamie Nancy. He's a singer, and Lewis Smith, who I know you'll know. Yes, of course. Lewis Smith's doing a master's, so they're all there at the minute. Lewis is the genius. Darren's obviously the best musician I think Northern Ireland's ever produced on any instrument. He's just one of the greatest drummers maybe ever. But Lewis is the smart one who's shocking everybody. He's designing apps for the disabled to allow them to perform music, and he's taken over the running of an ensemble called Acoustronic, which is one of the Ulster University flagship music in the community projects. And Lewis is I don't know. He's terrifying all the lecturers because he's so smart. Wow. So he's really having a second wind up there now, and God knows what he could do. He's that gifted. Just nobody knows what he could do. You know?
Great stuff. Linley, the album is out now. Making Other Arrangements. The very best of luck with it, and thank you for joining us in the studio today.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you.
Thank you.